For 30 long years, one of Brazil's most notorious criminal cases was considered completely shut. It was a horrifying story about a child's murder, a supposed satanic cult, and what looked like really swift justice. But the whole thing? It was a house of cards built on a foundation of torture and lies. So today, we're going to peel back the layers of this shocking 30-year injustice.
Just imagine for a second being forced to confess to a crime so horrible, a crime you had absolutely nothing to do with. For Beatriz Abage, one of the accused, this wasn't just some nightmare, it was her reality, a confession torn from her under the most brutal circumstances imaginable.
And here it is. This is the bombshell that brought the whole thing crashing down. In November 2023, the justice system finally, officially, admitted it had made a catastrophic error. The convictions were thrown out. The state itself acknowledged that the confessions, the very bedrock of the entire case, were obtained illegally.
So that raises the big questions, right? What exactly happened back in 1992? How did this small, quiet coastal town become the epicenter of a massive national scandal? And maybe the biggest question of all, how did a lie, a story literally fabricated through violence, hold up in court for 3 entire decades?
To really understand this, we have to go back to the beginning, to the atmosphere in 1992. We're in a little beach town in southern Brazil called Guaratuba, where a wave of fear was about to consume everyone.
Everything just spiraled out of control with terrifying speed. On April 6th, a little 6-year-old boy named Evandro vanishes. Just 5 days later, a child's horribly disfigured body is discovered in the woods. The town was, understandably, gripped by fear and anger. And by July, 7 people, including the town's own mayor's wife and daughter, were in custody, accused of the murder.
And the media? They didn't just report on this, they immediately went into overdrive, framing the whole story for the public. These are real headlines from the time. They weren't just covering a crime, they were creating a narrative. A story of evil outsiders, of a satanic cult preying on innocent children. The accused were never treated as suspects. They were instantly branded as barbarians and Satanists.
You know, what was happening in Guaratuba wasn't actually unique. It was the textbook case of what sociologists call a satanic panic. It's this wave of collective fear, often with no real basis in fact, that gets amplified by sensational media coverage. And it leads to this rush to judgment, often targeting people who just have different beliefs or lifestyles.
So while the public was being fed this horrifying story about monsters, something much, much more sinister was happening behind the scenes. And this is where the official story just completely breaks from the horrifying reality of the investigation.
I mean, just look at the contrast between the official story and the truth. It's night and day. The prosecution, they painted this picture of a carefully planned ritual murder by a satanic cult, where the members all willingly confessed. But the reality? It was an investigation driven by prejudice against people who practiced the Umbanda religion, a totally rushed police job, and confessions that were literally beaten out of people.
So how did they get these so-called confessions? Well, it was a horrifyingly simple 3-step playbook. First, police abducted the 7 individuals, many without any warrants. Then, they were taken to a remote house and systematically tortured. We're talking electric shocks, beatings, near drownings. And finally, once they were broken and terrified for their lives, a tape recorder was turned on and they were coached into confessing.
And in Beatriz Abage's own words, you can understand why someone would confess. She said it wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about survival. When you're being tortured, your brain just shifts to its most primal instinct: stay alive. She confessed not because it was true, but because she truly believed that if she didn't, she was going to be killed right there.
So the torture itself might have lasted hours or days, but the injustice it created, that would last for decades, destroying lives and families in its wake.
30. Just let that number sink in. 30 years. That's how long this injustice was allowed to stand. 3 decades of these people living with the label of child murderer. 30 years of a legal system failing to correct one of its most awful mistakes. It's just a staggering amount of time.
And the human toll was absolutely devastating. Beatriz was locked up for almost 6 years before even getting a final verdict. Her father, the mayor, died from cancer that she believes was brought on by the stress of seeing his family torn apart like that. All 7 of them had their names dragged through the mud, becoming synonymous with evil for a whole generation. And maybe the greatest tragedy of all? While the state was busy pursuing innocent people, the person who actually killed Evandro was never found.
For all those years, the case just seemed settled. The official story was written in stone. But then, an independent investigator started asking questions, and he would end up finding the one piece of evidence that could blow the whole thing wide open. And that investigator was a guy named Ivan Mizanzuk. Now, he wasn't a detective, not a lawyer, but a university professor and a podcaster who became completely obsessed with all the holes in the Evandro case. So starting in 2015, his podcast, Progetto Humanos, began this incredibly deep dive into the case files, re-examining every single piece of evidence.
And then he got the breakthrough. Mizanzuk found the one thing everyone thought was lost forever: the original, unedited confession tapes. A source who was apparently connected to one of the torturers who had since died handed them over. And what was on those tapes was absolutely chilling. You could hear not just the confessions, but the sounds of the torture itself. You could hear them crying, being told what to say, and you could hear the distinct hum and crackle of electric shocks being used.
This was it. This was the smoking gun. The audio was undeniable, irrefutable proof that the confessions were coerced. And under Brazilian law, any evidence you get through torture is illegal. It's inadmissible. The entire case against all 7 of them was built on this illegal evidence.
So, the convictions were annulled, but the story really doesn't end there. The Evandro case has become this landmark, a huge cautionary tale with powerful lessons that echo way beyond that little town in Brazil.
So what can we really take away from all this? Well, the case is a pretty stark reminder that torture can still be used as a police tactic to get evidence. It shows the incredible power the media has to shape a narrative and pressure the justice system. It highlights the serious danger of moral panics, especially when they target minority beliefs. And finally, it proves just how essential independent journalism is for holding powerful people accountable.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of haunting question. It took one dedicated podcaster working for years to finally unravel this 30-year-old lie. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other cases just like this one are out there, their truths buried, just waiting for someone to start digging?